Shakara Liddelow-Hunt is Wajarri Yamatji and grew up in Noongar Country. They are a researcher, advocate, and community builder centering the mental health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTQIA+ young people. Their work challenges Western research norms, making space for Indigenous methods that honor community and story. Our conversation was a reminder that research environments can and must be crafted with care, humility, and cultural safety. Shak's work uplifts youth voices, showing that the ancestors are reflected in them, and that their brilliance shapes the futures we're all moving toward.
Chwent is gonna ha.
Bonjour. Welcome to Tending Our Roots with Indigenous Methodologies, where we explore Indigenous approaches to research, evaluation, and community practice.
Our conversations center how Indigenous knowledges and ways of being address the structural limits of Western frameworks. This podcast is a living resource for those nurturing the health, healing, and futures of Indigenous communities.
I'm Migas Gonzalez.
And I'm Jill Fish.
Bonjour, Shak. So happy for you to be here today. Thanks for joining us.
Kaya, I'm so happy to be joining and talking to you both today.
So for Indigenous LGBTQ+ communities, language plays a vital role in supporting self-determination by allowing individuals to define and express their identities on their own terms. We use the term Two-Spirit, and while that's powerful, it comes from Indigenous nations in what's now Canada and the US. Can you share more about your identity and relationship with Indigenous LGBTQ+ communities? And are there Wajarri, Noongar, and other Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander words or frameworks that speak to the identities and experiences of LGBTQ+ communities? How do these terms reflect cultural values?
I don't think there's something like Two-Spirit that's encompassing all of our communities. And I don't know that as Aboriginal and queer people, we've really had enough opportunity to come together and develop that. I know it's something that a lot of people are interested in exploring. But what we do have is a lot of terms like sister girl and brother boy, which is kind of a cultural equivalent of saying like a trans man or a trans woman. Sister girl is like something that we would use just to refer to other Aboriginal women, like, oh, hey, sister girl, how you doing? And brother boy is the same, like, oh, hey, brother boy. So it's terms that I really like as like a way of indicating closeness, and this is your family, essentially. But also there are some language equivalents to that. There's this wonderful book called Colouring the Rainbow that contains a bunch of essays and a bunch of life stories. And in it, one of the storytellers, Torres, talks about learning different language words for sister girls from her grandmother. I think she's like Aranda and Walpre, and talks about like the equivalent word for her is essentially saying girl as a trans woman or as a sister girl. And she talks about as well using women's skin name, which is one of the things within a lot of Aboriginal cultures that we use kind of like to categorize ourselves. That doesn't seem like a very nice way of saying it. But like different affiliations that we have, which for Wajarris, that's a big part of how we determine marriages. And so I've heard a lot of conversation about like, you know, if you've married someone of the right skin, then your marriage is right. The sex of it and if it's the same-sex relationship actually maybe doesn't matter as much as the skin name. So I think that provides a really nice framework for how queer relationships can work in our culture. Similarly, Wajarri language and Noongar and a lot of other Aboriginal languages don't gender our pronouns. We would just say like balu or bal. And we have a lot of pronouns, but none of them are gendered. And so I think within our language, there's a lot of different bits and pieces that we can start to pull on to actually explore different gender expression and identity and relationships. And it's something that I'm excited to see how our communities continue to pick that up and shape it in the next couple of years, in the next couple of generations.
Yeah, almost like it's easier in sticking with the Aboriginal language to talk about that relationship.
Definitely. And I feel like it's helps, like, I don't know what the equivalent of it is for you, Mob. I guess like having two spirit is really helpful in keeping things grounded in culture. But like even just trying to explain to like elders how they then pronouns work. And it's like, well, actually, we've been doing this the entire time. That's not actually something that's new to us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In asking them to describe it, are they, like, confused then to translate that into English?
I guess so. I mean, certainly here in Bulu, in Perth, so many of us have like grown up speaking English as a first language, but with bits of language thrown in there. So again, the equivalent of BAL is like, we got that. We know how this works. This is something that's ours. It's not something that we've had to like take on through colonization, through like having to learn English language. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it definitely does. What's a skin name?
A skin is something that you oh my god, how do I describe skin names? There are a certain number of them within communities. So as Wajarris, we have 4, I think. Um, that you get one based on what your mother's is. It's like a cyclical, that determines what your skin is. And so that informs a lot of parts of our kinship relationships, including marriages, but also including like how you relate to other community members. And, people, your aunt or your grandmother or your niece or your grandchild, even if they're not direct relatives, like your skin can help inform that. But it's like, and saying skin is weird. I don't know why we do that in English. What anthropologist a century ago decided that skin was the correct English word to describe that. Um, but yeah, it's a cultural system. It's how we relate to each other.
It reminds me of our clan systems. Are they often Yeah, so are they often related to something in nature, like an animal or like a landmark or something?
A lot of us also have totemic systems as well. But yeah, skins can also be related to like have something totemic associated with them. And look, I'm not a cultural authority by any chance. Like I've grown up in the city, not on my own country. I've always grown up on Noongar Country as well as like a Wajarri person. So I also have to be very mindful that I'm a guest here and like from neighbouring mob living here on this country. But yeah, it's such a weird system to try and explain. Because I guess that's not how you learn it, right? You learn it through living it, not trying to put it into words. And I'm going to use that as my excuse for very badly articulating how skins work.
No, that's totally okay. I think I went really technical there with my follow-up questions.
Migas, I'm really glad you asked the skin name question just because that was the one that really stuck out to me, right? Like a lot of new information coming in, but I was like, what is a skin name? That is something I've just never heard of and something I will definitely do a lot of reading about later if I'm able to. But Shak, another reason I love talking to you is because you're sharing with us all this terminology that is different from maybe how Indigenous peoples identify and relate to themselves in the US or even in Canada. But can you share a little bit about your own identities and how that informs the work that you do?
Sure, I don't know exactly what you're looking for, but I'm first and foremost a Wajarri person. And I would also consider myself a Yamatji, which is kind of like an umbrella term for the Midwest. How it relates to Wajarri is a little bit contested. But I was born on Noongar Country. I think that because of that, Noongar Country really has its claws in me. This is my home and it always has been. I consider myself a queer person. I think I used to identify more with terms like bisexual or non-binary or any of that, but I'm really enjoying just being myself, being queer, being figure it out yourselves. It's not my problem to explain it. And I like the ambiguity that comes with that. I think a lot of the ways that we can describe ourselves within like LGBTQIA plus has such a medicalized history um, within like European science. And so particularly as Indigenous people, like figuring out how we then, those terms can be really powerful and they can be really helpful for us, but also they have a particular history associated with them and can shape our ways of thinking about things in ways that aren't always helpful. Does that get close in answering the question?
It's perfect. It's perfect. And I love that you even kind of humored me in answering that because I heard you say, like, I'm queer. And part of that is like, I don't have to explain myself to people. And that includes me and Migas. I thank you for telling us about where you're at in your identities because I think the work that you do is so important. And that kind of positionality informs that work too. And that brings me to our next question, which is, you're currently completing your PhD, yet you're already leading impactful community-driven projects. How do you balance the demands of academic life with your commitment to being a community-led researcher? What helps you stay connected to your community's needs while working within an institutional system?
I am very lucky in that so far, I think being a community led researcher hasn't hurt me or been too much difficulty because I'm within a team that is also our values. And I'm very lucky to have senior researchers like Beb, who I think you're talking to in another interview. People like Braden Hill as well as like a gay noir man and someone who is like respected within his own community. But I know the bubble's going to burst eventually. The academic system is pretty intense and pretty. It's funny. I was applying for a like student award a while back, and I was being a little bit cheeky about it because like wrote a wonderful impact section, but you know what they're looking for is like academic publications and awards and things like that that are very traditional and that don't traditional in the Western sense, not in our sense, and don't really connect with community at all. Like, who really is reading like academic research journals? That's not how you get your research findings out to the people who are actually participating in the research, which to me, that's the goal, right? Like, if the people who are part of your research can't actually see what you did with it, what the hell are you doing? Like, that's unacceptable. Um, but yeah, it's difficult. It often means arguing with the systems and sometimes over stupid petty stuff like how we reimburse research participants. I think a lot of universities like giving out people like gift cards or something, which especially as Indigenous people, where I don't know about what systems you've had, but like often we've been, having to deal with rations and different government systems. Like that's so disrespectful. And there's a little bit of trauma associated with that way of relating to people as well. Um, so yeah, constantly just fighting, which is obviously exhausting as, being an Indigenous academic. Um, but I've also been very lucky in working with a lot of amazing community leaders through things like we have a project governance group. We just have relationships with different people who help kind of advise and guide the research and try to ensure that those reciprocal relationships. And they've had a huge role in shaping how we work and ensuring that the research we do remains driven by community. Um, it's a balancing act. And it's frustrating that you often have to apply for grants. Not that I'm quite at that stage in my career, or have these like very sciencey publications or whatever that don't connect with the community in order to then get funding to do work that is actually going to be impactful to community. Um, but like I'm fascinated with how you've both dealt with this as well. You're a bit more senior than me and have been able to like incorporate Indigenous knowledges into the work that you do.
I really resonate with your feeling of being sort of in this bubble and this like protective space with, Bet being one of your mentors. I felt that too. I think because of that little bubble that was created, with a really amazing mentor that I have, I was able to grow in my research and in my skills in a way that I didn't feel constantly attacked, I guess, or constantly up against these barriers all by myself. So I think that's similar in the sense of we really need these supportive, and not just supportive, like people who know our experience, right? And our perspective, that are in these positions that are ahead of us, that can help, create these pathways that allow us to grow in ways that is going to be unique to us, but protective in that way. And I think as you gain more and more experience, like I do feel as though the ways in which now I sort of am up against barriers or need to be, on defense or on offense, however that looks, I have a little bit more skill and a little bit more experience, and my voice is a little stronger. And I see that in you, like you're going to be that person too, and leading ways and pathways, creating pathways for Indigenous folks and queer folks that are coming up with you and behind you.
I was just going to say that similarly, I have felt really empowered by my mentors and use them as a model for how I can push back and how I can take these academic or Western tools and use them for the purpose of my community. And I think it always helps to have mentors who have been there before so you can learn from them, and also mentors who show you how to push back, who show you how to set boundaries and how to stick to your values and how to not cave to what an institution wants at the expense of your community. And so I hear you say like I maybe my bubble will burst one day, but I actually hope your bubble just grows and that it's fortified and that it becomes impenetrable and that you're able to nurture that with these people around you, because I think that's how you get further, is not by yourself but with others. And you're already doing that. So I think that's wonderful.
It definitely speaks to the importance of having more Indigenous people in research spaces, though, and kind of hitting that critical mass. I guess I don't know if I like that word, but having enough of this and having strong support networks. And I'm pretty lucky in that the like research institute that I'm based at most of the time has an amazing Aboriginal staff network. And so even if we're not all working on the same projects, just having that space to like unpack and be with other people who are going through the same stuff, it's amazing, and it's such an integral part of like staying sane working in these institutions. But also, again, like I got to say, our governance committee, our advisory group, our elders group, like having someone in community to growl at you when you're not doing the right thing, also so important. And it helps me feel a little bit more safe in the work that I'm doing. Because I know if I'm not doing right by community, I'm going to get pulled up by it. And I think sometimes, like I've seen quite a lot of non-Indigenous researchers who are a bit defensive, and maybe don't really like getting told off and are quite scared of doing wrong by community. And as you should be, do the right thing. But also like learning is part of the process and getting growled at and then correcting yourself and having enough trust that people are going to pull you up. As a young Indigenous person, as a young researcher, I think has been really important in just making me feel that I am actually doing things properly and not getting lost within the system.
We were really impressed with the amount of work that you have under your belt so far and the work that is meaningful to community and connects with community, right? The Walk-in Cottage Inn Roadmap offers a framework for supporting the social and emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTQA+ young people. What makes this roadmap feel realistic and sustainable to you? What community-informed elements help ensure that it stays culturally grounded?
That was beautifully done. So by the way, Walk-in Cottage Inn is Rainbow Knowledge in Noongar. It's when we first started out the project, we're kind of brainstorming names with our youth advisory group, and that's something that they landed on. And that we got a proper like translation done by an elder here, Ani Roma. And so I think like bringing more language into the research space as well has definitely been something important to us. And Walk-in Cottage Inn has kind of become its own thing and its own symbol. So I'm really glad that we were able to put language behind that. But yeah, the roadmap was kind of the culmination of 5 or 6 years worth of research that we'd done, and all of the relationships and the advice and the need and the expertise that had come out of that process. And so in doing the roadmap, we'd gathered, I think, maybe 30 people initially in a forum, and then probably about 20 came back to the second forum to like co-design the roadmap together. And then we had review from probably another 20 people that we met through doing the project. And so we were very lucky in that the roadmap is the collective expertise of people who've been doing this for so much longer than me, through a bunch of different fields, whether it's like in the Aboriginal medical services, in the LGBT community controlled organisations, out in their own community, within like trying to fight with the government, and survive in that system as Indigenous people, as young people, as elders. We had a really diverse range of voices in that, and like people from mob across the culture, people from mob across the country, who all again come with really diverse experiences because we are all different cultures. Like I'm being a little bit general, I see, throughout this conversation. I'm reflecting as we talk about like Aboriginal peoples, but actually it's a whole continent worth of different cultures and like more than 200 different languages and our own ways of doing things. So I think the roadmap works because so much of that is present within it. And I don't think as researchers we were like discovering anything new or, and that's like a very colonial view of what science is, right? Is that you go out and you discover something and it's yours and it's new. But actually, I just think that it was just collecting for maybe the first time a lot of this knowledge and experience and expertise that has been existing out in our communities for decades now. And, queer elders who've been doing this for longer than I've been alive. having some of their experience reflected in the work. So yeah, not a discovery. We were really, I feel I'm very grateful that we were able to list a lot of those people as authors as a roadmap as well. Because it's their work and their ideas, which again I think is kind of this new part of doing research practice around who actually gets to be credited as an author, not just the research team, but the people who participated and contributed their knowledge to it. Um, but also the roadmap was very intentional, and we were told that it had to be around being easy to use. And it looks beautiful. I should mail you a copy, actually. It looks beautiful. It was designed by an Aboriginal artist called Kelly Sabietto, who I want to say is Noongar and Gidja, grew up Broome Way and lives down here in Boolaloo now. Who put this like amazing, it looks wonderful. It's very like pretty and engaging. And there's artwork through it done by a young Wajarri Yamatji artist, Kaya, who I think had first done some commissioned art for the project when they were like 15. Incredibly talented young person. And so through all of this and through, we have like 1-page snapshots and different chapters, and I'd like put together a video. We were just talking about the roadmap with a representative from an Aboriginal organisation and a queer organisation and a young person and an elder to talk about, why all this matters and why they chose to be part of the process and to, I guess, create the context around the roadmap as a document. And I mean, I love filming that video. It's really funny. Arnie Viv, like, talking about the first time that she went to the Court Hotel as a young woman, which is like the gay bar here in Perth. And having to like challenge some of her own assumptions and get kind of comfortable with these like outward displays of queerness. And I think seeing that reflection from an elder and that kind of learning process also really helps with a lot of the roadmap, like what it's doing and trying to slowly and gradually and sustainably build community acceptance. Yeah, I've completely gone off on tangent. I'm like very enthusiastic about all of this and have devoted the last like 18 months of my life to it. But there was a lot that went into it, and a lot of it wasn't us as the research team. It was things that existed out in the community, other activism that like our community has done that we were just able to capture.
It sounds amazing. We would love to see the roadmap and the art because that is so powerful and so special to be able to sit with, you know, queer elders and to be able to hear their stories and to be able to translate it into this roadmap in a way that is accessible but also needed by the community. And I think, something that stands out to me from when we've talked previously is you said something along the lines of, my work is community focused because that's what my community needs right now. And to have elders involved in it this way in the transmission of knowledge for, queer and LGBTQ plus acceptance, like how that is going to trickle down to, generations beyond you. I think that is so important and is such a long lasting impact that this kind of work and research can really have that goes far beyond a journal article.
Yeah, and I guess to get back to that point, I don't think as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we've had nearly enough queer representation. And even just within the last like 5 years, the amount that I have seen has like exploded exponentially. But without that, it meant that we were doing this research like with no mental health research, about Aboriginal and queer people. There was like a little bit of work talking about why it mattered and why we needed to do it and what we think are some of the issues affecting our community. But like there was kind of nothing. And I don't know that we've always like, I don't want to say been the most scientific because like our work is rigorous and it has to be in order to be meaningful and reliable for our communities to use. But I think the process of inquiry is different because it's not being guided by, oh, you know, we need to do rigorous science and uncover truth. And I'm on a little bit of a tangent over the last couple of days about like standpoint theory and epistemology and, you know, Indigenous approaches to research and coloniality. But it has been driven by community need because the community need is so great. One of the earlier things that we did in the project, and it was the first time that it had happened in Australia, was a survey about mental health, and some of it was about like suicide attempts and psychological distress. And the results were really not good. What we'd seen was that half the participants in the survey had tried to end their own life at some point, which is completely unacceptable. And it's something that like queer community activists have been saying for years and years is probably an issue. But no one put the research to it. And for whatever reason, it's just not seen as worthy of research, worthy of being kind of documented and written down, which, again, I don't understand that. We are maybe 10% of Aboriginal communities. And, you know, there's been a huge amount of research being done to address Aboriginal mental health and like the massive health inequalities that we experience because of colonisation. So why is this part of communities that we've seen really clearly has very different mental health outcomes and has all these challenges as well sometimes to being able to connect with our own cultures and our own communities? Like, why isn't that present? And so I think as a research team, we're really just fighting to put something on the page and there are a couple of other teams doing it, but it is a very new and very evolving topic of research that is rushing to meet this massive community need. And I don't even know how I got onto this, but yeah, that really was the guiding force behind everything that we're doing. The research has happened because it needs to, and it will be what it needs to be.
Absolutely. And what you're saying about representation and how limited it is for queer Aboriginal folks, but also the issue of suicide and, you know, needing community and needing to belong and have a identity and a positive sense of self. It makes me think of what folks say, and it is true that pride is suicide prevention. And that makes me think of your project that you're a part of, Pride Yarns. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And, you know, what is Pride Yarns and what conversations are you having there?
I absolutely can. Do you use like the term yarning in the US? Is that
No, we don't. So, yes. So we don't often. The times I think that we use it is in an Aboriginal context, but it's not something we use regularly in the research world.
so? Yarning is kind of a way of having a conversation, a culturally based way. It incorporates sometimes a lot of storytelling, sometimes not being a linear conversation, and a lot of deep listening, or what we sometimes call rerere, um, which is not necessarily the way that conversations often happen in Western contexts. It's different to like a very superficial making small talk conversation. And it's something that a lot of Aboriginal researchers have been fighting to get into a research space as a legitimate way of doing research with our mob and bringing that relationality that we have as Aboriginal people into the research space and seeing it as a strength of the research project and not like an issue with the objectivity of it. So Pride Yarns is a really fun little project that we're doing. It actually started out kind of by accident. We'd gotten a little bit of funding from a suicide prevention organization to put together a couple of like videos for YouTube and for TikTok of young people and elders having a conversation and like role modeling what support can look like. Um, which we did, and like the videos are fine, but they weren't the point. What ended up being really empowering about it was that we were scripting the videos together with queer young people and with a couple of really supportive elders. And actually, the conversations that ended up happening, um, for them to be able to sit together and say, okay, what's like important, what matters to us, what do we need to put into a video? And some of those conversations were about things like how do we navigate culture as queer people? Like one of the concepts that we talk about a lot over here is like men's business, women's business, men's country, women's country, and these different ways of engaging with culture that can be quite gendered. But actually, the conversations that ended up happening from like the elders who very knowledgeable elders, like amazing knowledge holders, being talk being able to talk through what connection to country and culture actually means and how approaching that through a less heteronormative lens, cisnormative lens, and that as non-binary young people and as trans young people, actually there are many ways that you can connect to the culture and be able to navigate that. It was just amazing. It's a conversation that I haven't seen occurring anywhere else. The fact that we'd accidentally created space to be able to have these like really meaningful conversations that have definitely stuck with me. And I was, only an observer in the room, let alone the young people who were actually there at the time, was great. And so that's kind of what Pride Yarns ended up becoming. We'd then applied for some funding from the Medical Research Future Fund over here in Australia to be able to test it as a potential like intergenerational culturally based intervention to support LGBTQIA plus young people. And so we're developing it at the moment. We've just done a whole bunch of co-design about what the project can potentially look like and have engaged a lot of young people, but also elders and also their family members and their carers and their close kin, who've been really cool to talk to and have like a whole bunch of new perspectives that we hadn't engaged with before and about how they really, really want to support the young people, but they don't always know how to do that or have the space to kind of process that. And so we're designing the project at the moment. I'm really excited to see how it's going to go down. Yeah, I think it'll be something really amazing and really unique. Particularly in the context that like a lot of what we'd previously done in Walk and Cuttagen was it was exploratory, it was mapping out the space, it was, this first research around what is going on for young people's well-being and their mental health. And now being in the space of like, all right, what are we going to do about it? Here is a culturally based intervention that could potentially work for them and be a way of supporting them. It's exciting. I'm glad we've really gotten to this point now. And yeah, it's such a fun project to be part of. I don't know if you can tell how enthusiastic I am to talk about it. But yeah, it's been great.
When you started, you called it like this little project. I'm like, it's very impactful. And you talk about the young people, but I imagine it's as beneficial to elders too, right? And connecting in that way and connecting on a topic that means something to them as well. We do want to touch on connecting with youth because often our communities boast the value in our youth. However, us quote unquote older generation, that I'm including me and Jilla with, we often don't understand how to yarn or research with our young people. So, what lessons have you learned in your intergenerational work that can uplift the voices of our young people? You can also talk about how did creating something like TikToks, right, build stronger connections.
It's really funny because when I started working on all of this, I was like a bona fide young person, and I'm not anymore. And I've had to accept that and start to rethink how I do research now that I'm not like a proper peer researcher. I'm becoming one of the older people. So this question kind of challenged me actually. That like, but I think that one of the things that's been cool about Pride Yarns is kind of like you said, it's two-way learning. And yeah, the young people are learning a lot from their elders, but also it is an opportunity for them to educate the elders about what it means to be LGBTQA plus, but also what's important to them and what, their experience is. Because, we've all been young people before, but what it looks like in 2025 is really different to what being a young person was like 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. And I think one of the things that one of the elders said during Pride Yarns, and it's really stuck with me, is that when they look at these young people who are staunch, who are proud of who they are, who are learning their culture, and who sometimes have the absolute guts to like push back against the elders a little bit, respectfully, but to be able to stand up for themselves and to stand up for other young people. One of the elders had remarked that like they look at this generation of young people and they can see their ancestors reflected in them and see the kind of older people coming back up through this new generation. Um, and I don't know, I think that shifted my perspective a little bit, that the young people are also leaders. And they do have all of this strength and knowledge. And I don't know, like, obviously, it's about growing young people and giving them more opportunities to come into their leadership. Um, and I think one of the things that we've been really trying to do is create more opportunities to do that. So, like, a couple of our publications have been co-authored with the young people, to pull more of their voice through the things that we're writing, but also doing that in the way that they want and allowing the research project to be development for them. So, like for some young people, that's really academic. For some of them, it's more creative or it's more community oriented. But yeah, it's a difficult space, and I don't know that I've got it down perfectly, or that I even quite know what we're doing half the time. And I don't know if there's enough, like, not that there needs to be a research methodology around it, but it's the way that we actually learn things of doing them and feeling them out and the relationships that exist and I think I saw it like described as like the social memory that exists within our communities. But yeah, like young people are amazing if you let them be amazing.
They are, and I love that because it really respects young people, and I think gives them the power that they deserve to have in our communities, which is that they are wonderful and have their own knowledge to contribute, and that oftentimes we forget that. And so it sounds like in the work that you do, it prioritizes the relationship, but also respects the relationship that youth are hoping to have with the project and really letting that guide you.
I really hope so. I think that's definitely the goal, and you've kind of articulated it there. Um, and I guess one of the things that's also impactful about Pride Yarns is that not all of the young people involved have had a lot of opportunities to connect with elders or connect with their culture, for all of these complicated reasons that like really are downstream effects of colonialism. But certainly here in Australia, like the rate of child removal um, is pretty terrible. Um, so I don't quite know how to put this, but like they come with all of this strength, but all of this like hunger. Um, and seeing who the young people then become when they actually get the space to be themselves and their whole selves and learn and connect. Um, yeah, I don't know. And they just are these amazing people. Like back in maybe 2019, when we were like first starting out the project, we were doing interviews. And one of the young people who'd done an interview at the time, who was like 17 and very sweet, and who I've seen again many, many times since they kind of reappeared maybe a year or two ago, and have just grown into this like leader and staunch and so like confident and strong in who they are. And I feel like a proud auntie just watching them now because they really have become like a voice in community, and have just come into themselves. And yeah, I'm proud of them. Like, yeah, I think I might have lost the thread there, but like, oh, there was a question about TikTok. Yeah, we were trying to make TikToks. I don't know that TikTok was the point, but meeting young people where they're at in general, and for a lot of them that is social media. And certainly in the last couple of years, like I've seen a lot of queer Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people up there being themselves, being funny, being leaders. And I think, because we are a big country and we are a small part of a small community within this like massive country, um, the social media is actually a really powerful way to be able to see and connect with other people like yourself, or not like yourself, but with, diverse experiences and perspectives, and is a place I think that a lot of that leadership and that exploration has emerged.
We all need this reminder to meet everyone where they're at, but especially young people in the world that we live in now, which, as you said, is so different from 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I love this conversation because I think many of our conversations were thinking about healthy and well Indigenous futures. And we have to remember that we have to remember that Indigenous futures are for youth and start with youth. So I just love this conversation, Shak, and really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us. This has been so wonderful.
That is an excellent point, and I think you talk about it in the US as well, the like idea that you're doing this for the next 7 generations. Why do I feel like I've read a paper that you'd written a while back about that approach to doing work? Um,
I wrote one with Bep actually. So that's it. That's why. Yes.
um, but it's true, and I think that that's something that we do well as Indigenous people that sometimes gets overlooked is that futurity and that planning, for what's gonna happen for your children, for your grandchildren, for your great-grandchildren, who we kinda culturally conceptualize as ourselves. It's a little bit complicated. Um, but yeah, that's an excellent point. And I can't not mention the fact that in Australia, we've got a social media ban for young people coming in as well, which has been very controversial. And I am not excited about in any means. I think it misses some of the strengths that exist in those online spaces, particularly for marginalized young people and as a way of finding community. But I'm interested to see in the next couple of generations how we can incorporate things like that into being who we are. Because our cultures aren't static, they're shifting and evolving. And I think where we can pull on different mediums and different technologies to enhance our culture instead of to detract from it, I think that's really powerful. And I think that's something that young people do so well, that as older people we're maybe not the best at and a little bit resistant to sometimes.
Yes, definitely. I don't know that I'm resistant. I am resistant to it, actually. I'll admit that. I'm a little resistant, only because it's a lack of understanding how to use those in ways that feel my own little self. But I think that's to each his own, right? But what I do appreciate about you is so many things. But I think what you talk about often is in this conversation, what you're sort of hitting at for me is this idea of representation, and when you talked about your need for mentorship at an academic level, you talked about that representation of Indigenous folks, of queer folks, to help in that way. When we asked you about young people, you're like, I'm not a young person anymore. I can't speak to them. And I think that's really important for us to remember, is that we are only our own experience. And if we're not opening up those spaces for everybody to speak their truth, to speak their experiences, then we're missing the boat. So I do appreciate that about you, and your value for that connection, right? Your value in the projects that you talked about, that deep connection between folks, between young people, between old people, just between community, and sharing in those stories, how powerful that's going to be. And I imagine that expanding, right? And I'm really excited to hear about your project you're working on now and how that evolves. And I hope we can talk about that at some point too. But really appreciate you sharing your work with us and your experiences with us.
And it has been such a privilege to connect with you both. I hugely admire the work that you do. And I even acknowledging that we have different experiences and we have different cultures, but also a lot of similarity there, that it's been really fun to explore with you a bit. And I'm really excited that there's this global movement of Indigenous people. And yeah, we're gonna smash the colony, I guess, collectively. um, and finding these opportunities to collaborate and grow our knowledges together and find what a global future looks like for Indigenous people. I don't know. It's been really fun to have this conversation and to meet you both and to hear about all the work that you're doing and the way that you're also able to bring Indigenous knowledges and perspectives into your research. It's been great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Shak. Smash the colony, everybody. Smash the colony. You have been listening to Tending Our Roots with Indigenous Methodologies. We are your hosts, Jill Fish, Tuscarora Nation.
And Migas Gonzalez, Lakudere Ojibwe. This podcast was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and supported by the Circle P50 Center of Excellence, funded through the National Institute on Drug Abuse of the National Institutes of Health. The content is solely the responsibility of the hosts and their guests and does not necessarily represent the official views of their funders.
Production of this season was made possible by solar-powered studios in what is now known as St. Paul, Minnesota, on Dakota Homelands. Podcast artwork was completed by Marlena Miles. a Spirit Lake, Dakota, Mohegan, and Muskogee artist. Our theme song, Best of Me, is used with the permission of Anishinaabe and First Nations singer-songwriter Leonard Sumner. You can find more detailed information in our show notes.
Miigwech for listening.
Nyawet.
If you'd seen the dark that I've seen and the struggle, you wouldn't walk another mile on your own.